And now I believe that we maintain Grecia, yes, Paola, with Filipa Cruz. Let me see if Filipa is, yes, okay.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah. Oh, welcome. Both of you will present Mira no Infinito e Mira no outro Espaço, uma reflexão sobre as invisibilidades do gesso e do molde na produção artística. Let me check on my notes. So Filipa Cruz is an artist, a researcher, and a professor at the Faculty of Fine Arts of Porto and at the Paris College of Art. She's a doctorate at the Faculty of Fine Arts of Porto, a master at Beaux-Arts de Paris, and a postgraduate in aesthetics at Panthéon-Sorbonne. Paola, I already introduced your bio, so when you are both ready, you may begin. Thank you so much.
So thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone, and I want to thank you all for this opportunity. So our work is entitled Mira no Infinito and Mira no outro Espaço, a reflection on the invisibilities of plaster and mold casting in artistic production, and arises from the authorial artistic practice to think about concepts such as sculpture, plaster, mold casting, invisibilities, and artistic production. In the use of plaster in contemporary art, one can question the dynamics of invisibility, memory, oblivion, and power. Those are features enclosed in the matter projected into the future. The power is then understood as a force that extends and varies in intensity over time, and as a mark, like fossils, which preserves information in the material. On the notion of invisibility, two artists are summoned by the relationship between visibility and visibility. Marie-José Burki and Charlotte Moth deal with the accumulation of sculptural bodies in gypsoteques or reserves. Burki and Moth capture these plaster bodies and display them photographically or videographically, granting visibility to a mute crowd. These bodies are ghosts, posthumous lives materialized in plaster that cross time and that survive. Crowded bodies that create encounters and disagreements, compositional cohabitations, proposing new sculptural groups. Finally, Moth and Burki propose a reinvention through the image, a revival of memory and accumulation that generates new stories through editing. Differently from how invisibility is made visible in the cases mentioned, the invisibility of plaster and mold casting processes in artistic creation is also explored in the artistic production of the author that you already know, Grecia Paola, and in Do It and Doing It. In three artistic proposals, the presence-absence of plaster is analyzed through process and result. That means we focus on the technical ingenuity of casting as a strategic, silent, and invisible process in the construction of forms. However, we can also focus in the ductile and in the poetical characteristics of plaster that leads to its incorporation in artistic objects. Therefore, invisibility is taken as what is effectively not seen or not presented at first sight. This invisible dimension, although not evident, exists and is crucial for the construction of the visible layers of the artistic projects. One can say that plaster has multiple applicability in different fields of knowledge. In art, by integrating the artistic process, plaster stands out in the modeling, mold casting, and/or reproduction of pieces. In any of these dimensions, very specific gestures and procedures involve its use and exploration. Undoubtedly, its challenges and opportunities are decisive for reaching the finished work. However, when it comes to the final piece, one could notice a certain layer of visibility or invisibility regarding its visible and effective presence. To tackle this subject, we present three works where plaster is explored. So the first project is Do It. In the exhibition Do It, and Zurich Ubrist proposes a series of instructions to be interpreted and brought to life. So in 2017, Do It takes place at the Faculty of Fine Arts of the University of Porto. However, it is Home Do It, a work of 1989 by Franz West, that is an artist that is a reference in the use of plaster, that captures our attention. Do It takes into account West's protocol for the production of a pastuk and for its exploration and use. Eva Couteiro, Grécia Paola, Marta Arcanjo, and Ruth Rosas created, activated, and destroyed this broom object where plaster composes its poetic structure. In this exercise, the project is repeatable and transformable through reinterpretation. Plaster and power meet. The power imprinted on matter generates new gestures and forms recovered in different temporal moments, and as a result of survival over the passage of centuries. So the second project, Mira no Infinito, and third project, Mira no Outro Espaço, are aware of the creative possibilities of plaster in nowadays practice, namely in the way it can participate in the construction of the author's artistic work. For this reason, these two examples that we are going to present now are just two within the same artistic practice, two projects where plaster belongs to the process and or to the result, which means the final piece. In the conceptual development of Mira no Infinito, the sphere appears for its technical and aesthetical value, as it is a frequent three-dimensional geometric shape in nature. The sphere is a surface of complete symmetry with independent balance, but it's a volume always vacillating between a perfect body, that is, a perfect sphere, and an imperfect body, that is, a body that, by not meeting exactly the equidistance of all its points to the center, draw it away from perfection. If we consider that on growth and form, Darcy Wentworth Thompson refers that in the evolution of forms, simple and complex structures aim at the survival of a given organism, Mira no Infinito explores the sphere as a protector. According to Thompson, the sphere is the only surface that can enclose finite space. The others can only help to do so in combination with each other or with the sphere itself. Therefore, the spherical body of Mira no Infinito was explored from a coexisting duality. The first part, a solitary object in the surrounding space that protects a finite space, a finite interior that proposes an infinite space. Mira no Infinito responds to the challenge of constructing a hollow spherical element assumed as a container. And then we have the invisible reality outside the object and the know-how inherent to the use of plaster and mold casting for the construction of the sphere. Therefore, plaster and mold casting are present. In this specific project, during the act of creation, those two agents fulfill a technical intention that is linked to the reproduction of elements and constructive processes associated with the manufacture of the object, but also in the result by being explored as an active material in the artwork. Technically speaking, there are several phases for the construction of the spherical component, such as the construction of a gauge for the preparation of the hemisphere, the reproduction of the semisphere, the construction of the plaster box inside the sphere, the technicalities of assembling both parts in a single volume, that is, the union of the two semispheres. Plaster is a material that, when accumulated, gives rise to heavy objects. As a material with ductile feature, careful handling is essential not to damage or not to break the piece as it's in its weakest points, although it is always possible to correct small flaws. In Mira no Infinito, the plaster participates in the procedural component and in the compositional result. If the mold casting processes define the artistic process, the desired result is a sphere marked by a white language, clean and visually polished. For this reason, the spherical object that is marked takes on the rawness and candor of the plaster of Paris, which means that finally this sculpture deals with the oscillation between of visibilities and invisibilities due to the work's ability to propose different layers visible and non-visible, exploring different techniques in a sculptural project. Different from Mira no Infinito, the project entitled Mira no Outro Espaço explores plaster, mold casting, and repetition exclusively as a part of the artwork's process. In other words, the invisibility comes from its non-direct intervention in the final composition. With the result of a cylindrical body suspended in space, the interior of the sculpture keeps the memory of the casting process associated with it. As we head into the cylindrical volume, we are faced with a set of spherical bodies in the shape of monstrous eyes that look at us. They are attached to the dome, to a dome that is not visible to the audience, that organizes those eyes spatially, enveloping the visual field of those who are lurking and of those who are invited to enter in this space. At first sight, the sculpture does not reveal the know-how inherent to this material, considered an accessible and quick way to make models and that can be reproduced in other materials. And this technique, however, the interior of the cylindrical body keeps the memory of those processes. In conclusion, this study allowed us to identify processes related to the procedures for construction of a plaster sphere and of rigid and flexible molds. In the design and execution of different stages of contemporary sculptural objects, our objective was focusing on the visibility of plaster, its technical dimension, which means construction, structures, and pieces fabrication, and also in its aesthetical dimension, which means functions in the final composition. This leads us to conclude that in the dynamics of Gracia Paola's practice, the know-how in closing plaster, molds, and casting is expressed in the visible surface of the work or implicit in the process that led to its production. Thank you very much.